My daughter forced me to sign over my paycheck, calling me too old to manage my money. She didn't know I was a secret multimillionaire, and the form I signed wasn't a surrender. It was the first step in her total financial destruction. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. From now on, your paycheck goes into my account. You don't need anything anyway, my daughter said. I quietly agreed. That night, she and her husband came over for free dinner, just like always. But when they walked in, they screamed in shock, because the scent of Christmas in my city row house used to be a comforting mix of baking gingerbread and fresh pine. This year, a new sour note had been added, the clawing, fruity aroma of my daughter's vape pen. It clung to the decorations and mocked the quiet dignity of the season. I stood in my kitchen, the place that had been the heart of this family for 30 years, and felt a weariness that went bone deep. I am Brenda, 62 years old, and my hands, still strong, methodically kneaded dough. Outside, a gentle snow was falling. It was a picture-perfect Christmas Eve, and I felt like a ghost in my own home. My daughter Eliza was the source of this soul-crushing exhaustion. At 27, she was draped across my living room sofa, a spot where her father, Robert, used to read the paper. She wasn't reading, she was curating. Her phone was held high, her face a mask of manufactured bliss as she took selfies. The Christmas tree, a calculated prop in the background. Holiday vibes, she murmured to her unseen audience. Just relaxing and letting Mom handle all the hard work. Blessed. I watched from the kitchen doorway, an invisible figure in my own home. She was a self-proclaimed content creator, though the only brand she influenced was her own relentless entitlement. Her life was a performance, and I was the unwilling, unpaid stage crew. Her husband, Mark, a man whose entrepreneurial ventures were as frequent as they were fruitless, sat in Robert's old armchair, scrolling through his own phone. This house was the culmination of a lifetime of hard work. My late husband, Robert, a city bus driver for 40 years, and I, a registered nurse who worked more double shifts than I could count, had poured our sweat and savings into this place. We had paid it off 3 years before he passed. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, it had become Eliza and Mark's home base. They moved in after their wedding, just to get on their feet. 3 years later, their feet were still firmly planted on my coffee table, usually in designer sneakers I had indirectly paid for. They did not pay rent. They did not cook. They did not clean. They simply consumed. My quiet retirement had become a third shift, and my patience, honed over a lifetime of nursing, was worn down to a dangerously thin thread. The grand plan was unveiled 3 days before Christmas, over a dinner of takeout Thai I had paid for. "So, Mom," Eliza began, her fork suspended dramatically, "Mark and I have been thinking. Christmas Eve is the perfect opportunity for us to make a huge splash. All my most important contacts, the big influencers, are in town," she said. "It's a primetime slot for engagement," Mark chimed in, using a buzzword from a podcast. "A Christmas Eve party, right here. The content we could create. It would be a game changer for Eliza's brand." They weren't talking about a family gathering. They were talking about turning my home, my quiet sanctuary, into their sound stage. "A party sounds like a lot of work," I said, my voice deliberately tired. "Not for you," Eliza said with a bright, dismissive laugh. "We'll handle the guest list, the music, all the important stuff. We just need a little help with the logistics." Then came the presentation. Mark pulled out his tablet. On the screen was a detailed, breathtakingly audacious budget proposal, disguised as a mood board. "For catering," Eliza began, pointing to a photo of an overflowing charcuterie board. "We're thinking artisanal cheeses, imported cured meats. Very sophisticated. She swiped to a photo of jewel-toned cocktails. We want to set up a craft cocktail bar, a mixologist. The list went on. Gourmet appetizers, a champagne tower, professional decorations, a sound system, even a red carpet for the front walkway for the arrival experience. It was a corporate event. The product being launched was my daughter. The cost would be thousands of dollars. This all looks very expensive, sweetheart, I said gently. It's an investment, Mom, Kyle said, his voice smooth and reasonable. You have to spend money to make money. This party will pay for itself 10 times over. They weren't just asking me to fund a party. They were asking me to be their angel investor. They looked at me, their faces alight with a shared delusional enthusiasm. They weren't asking. They were expecting. I looked from the glossy fantasy on the screen to my daughter's entitled face. The thread of my patience, which had been fraying for years, was now pulled so taut. It was humming. No, I said. The word was small, quiet, and utterly revolutionary. Eliza stared at me, her perfectly glossed lips parted in pure shock. What? What do you mean, no? I mean no, Eliza, I repeated, my voice quiet but firm. I'm sorry, but I can't afford this. I'm a retired woman living on a fixed income. A champagne tower and a private mixologist are not in my budget. I was giving her an olive branch, a logical reason she could accept. She did not take it. She saw it as an act of war. Her beautiful, curated features hardened into an ugly mask of pure rage. Not in your budget? She shrieked, her voice piercing. Are you kidding me? This is a paid-off house, Mom. You have no expenses. What are you even doing with all your money? I am living, Eliza, I said, my voice a calm island in her hurricane. I am paying my bills. I am saving for my own future. I am being a responsible adult. Responsible? She spat the word. You're being selfish. You're hoarding your money while your own family is trying to build a future. This isn't just a party. It's my career, and you're trying to sabotage it. That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? I said. I'll show you dramatic, she hissed. She stood up, her movements jerky and aggressive. I knew this would happen. I knew you weren't capable of managing your own finances anymore. You're getting old, Mom. You're losing track of things. Mark, my silent, enabling son-in-law, chose that moment to make his move. He stood and put a supportive arm around his wife's shoulders. Eliza is right, Brenda, he said, his voice a low, manipulative murmur. We've been worried about you. You've seemed confused lately. We just want to help. They were a pair of circling wolves closing in. And then Eliza delivered the final, unforgivable demand. She walked to the small printer in the corner and picked up a piece of paper. I realized with a chilling certainty she had printed it out before this conversation even began. She had been prepared for my refusal. She slapped the paper down on the table in front of me. It was a direct deposit authorization form for my Social Security check. You're right, Mom, she said, her voice now a cold, clinical calm. You're getting old. You can't be trusted with your own money anymore. So from now on, your paycheck goes into my account. I'll manage it for you. I'll give you an allowance for groceries. She looked at me, her eyes as hard as a banker's heart. You don't need anything anyway, she said. The thread didn't just break. It was incinerated. I stared at the form, at the blueprint for my own personal and financial annihilation. My daughter had just declared me incompetent and stripped me of my autonomy. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the form in her face and ordered her out of my house. But the woman who sat at that table was not the old Brenda. I had been pushed past the breaking point and discovered not a void, but a core of pure, cold, unyielding resolve. So I did not fight. I surrendered. But it was a different kind of surrender. It was an act of strategic power. I looked up from the form and I smiled, a serene, weary smile. You know what, dear? I said, my voice a soft, tired sigh. You're right. I've been having trouble keeping track of things. Maybe this is for the best. My capitulation was so swift it stunned them. A look of pure, ugly triumph spread across Eliza's face. She had won. She and Mark exchanged a smug, knowing glance. The old woman had been managed. I knew you'd understand, Mom, she purred, the voice of a benevolent dictator. It's just to help you. I know, sweetheart. I picked up a pen. Where do I sign? She showed me, her perfectly manicured finger pointing to the line, as if guiding a slow child. I took the form. I looked at the routing number and account number for her personal checking account. And then, with a hand that was beautifully steady, I filled it out. I wrote down my social security number. I wrote down my name. And in the space for the bank account information, I wrote down a series of numbers. Then I signed it. I slid the completed form across the table. There you go, dear, I said. You're in charge now. She snatched the form, her eyes scanning it with a proprietary glance. She did not, of course, recognize that the account number was not hers. She just saw a string of data that represented her victory. Thank you, Mom, she said, a thoughtless final insult. She folded the paper and tucked it into her purse, a trophy from a battle she had no idea she had just catastrophically lost. They left shortly after that, triumphant. As they walked out the door, Eliza delivered one final arrogant command. Hey, Mom, she said, her voice cheerful. We're coming over for dinner before the party on Christmas Eve. Make that pot roast we like, and don't forget to clean up. I just smiled my serene, empty smile. Of course, dear. See you at Seveshmoul. The trap was not just set. The bait had been taken, and the door had just slammed shut. The moment the front door closed, the mask of the weary mother dissolved. The actress left the stage. I did not weep. I did not rage. I walked with a calm, deliberate purpose to the phone. It was time to call my sister. Diane answered on the first ring. Hello? It's time, I said. There was a brief, loaded pause. Then her voice came back, a low hum of a general given the order to advance. She did it. She did it, I confirmed. The direct deposit form? She has it. She believes she has won. That little... Diane began a string of creative, furious curses that was her own unique love language. She cut herself off, shifting from sisterly rage to professional calm. Okay, the new condo is ready. The moving truck is on standby. I can have them at your house by 2 a.m. Christmas morning. Are you absolutely sure about this, Bren? Once we start, there is no going back. This was not a challenge. It was a final, loving check. She needed to know this was the real thing. I'm sure, Diane, I said, my voice solid as granite. I looked around my living room, at the beautiful tree, and felt not a pang of sadness, but a profound, satisfying detachment. This was no longer my home. It was a stage set. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a carefully planned exit strategy, a code-red protocol my fierce, practical sister had been helping me build for months. It had all started 3 months prior, after Eliza had borrowed my credit card and run up a $2,000 bill on an impulsive shopping spree. I had been weeping on the phone to Diane, a pathetic litany of my own helplessness, and Diane, for the first time, had not offered sympathy. She had offered a solution. That's it, she had snapped. We're done. We are getting you out of there. The cornerstone of my daughter's entitlement and the foundation of my liberation plan was a lie. A quiet lie of omission I had cultivated for her entire adult life. Eliza believed her mother to be a woman of modest, dwindling means. She saw the paid-off row house, the sensible 10-year-old car, and she saw a woman living on a fixed income. She saw an asset to be managed. She had no idea who I really was. She had no idea that her father, Robert, the quiet, unassuming city bus driver, had been a quiet, brilliant stock market investor. He had started with a small inheritance and, over 40 years, had built a fortune. A quiet, secret, multi-million-dollar fortune he had never told our daughter about. "You don't give a child a fish, Brenda," he used to tell me. "You teach them to fish. And you certainly don't tell them there's a freezer full of fish in the basement, or they'll never learn to bait a hook." But the lesson had failed to take. She had seen our discipline as lack, and had grown up with a resentful hunger for the very things we tried to teach her were unimportant. When Robert passed, he left it all to me. The paycheck my daughter had just seized control of was my monthly Social Security deposit, a sum so laughably small compared to my true net worth that it was a rounding error. It was the crumbs from a feast she never knew existed. Eliza believed she had captured the queen. In fact, she had just captured a single decoy pawn. The direct deposit form I had so obediently filled out was a masterpiece of deception. The form was real. My Social Security number was real, but the account and routing numbers I had written on it were not for her checking account. They were not even for my primary account. On the advice of my financial advisor, Mr. Graves, I had opened a new secondary checking account at a different bank 2 months ago, an account Eliza had no knowledge of. I had already filed the correct paperwork with the Social Security Administration, directing my actual check into that new, secret, untouchable account. The form I had given my daughter, the one she held in her purse like a captured flag, was a clever forgery. The account numbers on it were for a different account altogether, an old, forgotten savings account I hadn't used in years, an account that currently held a grand total of $1,142. Eliza, a woman who couldn't balance her own checkbook, would file the form and wait for the money to start flowing in. And she would wait, and she would wait. The money would never come. The trap was not just financial, it was bureaucratic, a beautiful, elegant, inescapable snare. And my brilliant, arrogant daughter had just walked right into it with a triumphant smile on her face. Mr. Graves, the loyal gentleman who had managed Robert's portfolio for 20 years, had helped me devise the plan. "The problem, Brenda," he had explained in his calm, precise voice when I finally confessed the situation, "is that your daughter sees you as a resource, not a person. A resource she believes she is entitled to. Our objective, therefore, is not to punish her. It is to re-educate her. We must teach her the fundamental economic principle of scarcity." So we had created the decoy. The old dormant savings account was a ghost in my financial machine. The numbers were real. The form was legal. But the outcome would be a quiet, frustrating nothing. When Eliza inevitably called her bank to complain, they would tell her the problem wasn't on their end. They would tell her to check with the Social Security Administration. And when she called them, a feat of bureaucratic patience she was singularly unequipped for, they would tell her the deposit had been made successfully to the account number on file. My account number on file. My new, secret one. She would be trapped in an administrative nightmare of her own making. She would have the form, her proof of authority, but it would be a key to a lock that had already been changed. But this financial trap was only phase 1. Phase 2 was Diane's masterpiece, the Great Evacuation, she called it, a reverse heist. The days between that final confrontation and Christmas Eve were a surreal period of quiet, clandestine activity. On the surface, I was the same defeated Brenda. I played my part, sighing and looking tired, which Eliza and Mark interpreted as a geriatric sulk. They left me alone, their victory so complete. They were in a state of triumphant frenzy, on the phone constantly, inviting friends to their epic party. They went on massive shopping sprees, buying new outfits and breathtaking amounts of high-end liquor. They were spending money they did not have, with the confidence that my money was now theirs. All the while, I was orchestrating my escape. While they were out, I moved through the house like a ghost. I packed the things that mattered, the artifacts of my soul, the old leather-bound photo albums, my mother's porcelain tea set, Robert's favorite worn-out jacket, which still hung in my closet and faintly smelled of him. I packed them into small, unmarked boxes. Late one night, while they were at a celebratory dinner, I loaded them into my car and drove them to my new waiting condo. It was the first satisfying act of my liberation. Diane had hired the moving company, a discreet, expensive outfit that specialized in after-hours executive relocations. They were a team of professional ghosts, experts in making large, valuable things disappear in the middle of the night. The plan was set for the early hours of Christmas morning, a time when my daughter and her friends would be in a drunken, oblivious slumber. The timing wasn't just practical, it was poetic. I was going to give my daughter a Christmas of profound educational emptiness. The afternoon of Christmas Eve arrived. The house was already a ghost of itself, its soul packed away, but the stage was set for one final performance. At 4:00 p.m. my phone buzzed. A text from Eliza. "Hey, we're on our way back to drop off party stuff, then going out for a quick drink. We'll be back for dinner around 7. It was not a question. It was a decree. Then the final command. "Make that pot roast we like. The one with the carrots and potatoes. And don't forget to clean up the kitchen before we get back. I want the place perfect for my guests." I stared at the cold, black letters. I felt no anger, no hurt. The part of me that could be wounded by her was gone. This was not a daughter I was abandoning. This was a parasite I was finally removing. I held my thumb over the keyboard and composed my reply. A simple, beautiful lie. "Of course, dear. The pot roast is already in the oven. See you at 7. I hit send. The final piece of bait was laid. She would come home at 7, expecting the warm, familiar smells of a home-cooked meal. The pot roast was not, of course, in the oven. The oven was cold and clean. The menu for the first time in her life would consist of a single unpalatable dish, the cold, hard taste of consequences. At precisely 7, I heard their car in the driveway, the familiar, arrogant roar of Mark's oversized SUV. I heard their laughter, loud and oblivious in the quiet winter night. They were on their way to their party, and all that stood between them and their glorious evening was a quick, free meal at the expense of the old woman they had so successfully conquered. I stood in the shadows of the empty dining room, my heart a steady, expectant drum. The front door opened. "Mom!" Eliza called out, her voice bright and false. "We're home and we're starving. I hope that pot roast is as good as it smells in my imagination." But the house did not smell of pot roast. It smelled of cold, empty, sterile silence. They stopped dead in the foyer. The usual warm glow of the lamps was gone. The house was dark. "Mom?" Eliza called again, her voice smaller now, uncertain. They took a few steps into the living room, and then they froze. Their eyes, accustomed to the warm, cluttered, festive landscape, were met with a scene of such stark, shocking emptiness that their brains could not process it. The sofa was gone. The armchairs were gone. The Christmas tree, with its mountain of presents, was gone. The rugs, the lamps, the paintings, the very fabric of their world had been vaporized. What is this?" Mark stammered. "Were we robbed?" Eliza didn't answer. She was standing frozen, her made-up face a mask of uncomprehending shock. Then she began to move, stumbling like a sleepwalker from one empty room to the next. Her high heels clicked with a sharp, jarring sound on the bare hardwood floors. Dining room. Empty. Family room. Empty. Then she ran, her movements now a frantic scramble into the kitchen. The kitchen, the heart of the home, was a tomb. The counters were bare. The cabinets were open and empty. The refrigerator, the symbol of her mother's endless, taken-for-granted provision, stood silent and dark. The shock was a physical, visceral thing. The house was not just empty, it was impossible. And in the face of that impossibility, my arrogant, entitled daughter finally, and with a beautiful, satisfying finality, began to scream. It was not a scream of fear. It was a raw, primal, infuriated cry of baffled rage. The sound of a queen who has returned to her castle to find the servants have vanished and taken the castle with them. She raced through the echoing house, up to her own room, the one island of untouched, chaotic reality. The sight of her own belongings confused her even further. This was not a robbery. This was something targeted, something terrifying. They ended up back in the kitchen, the cold, sterile heart of the empty house. Eliza was panting, her face a mess of tears and mascara. And then Mark saw it. His eyes darting with animalistic panic, focused on the one single object in the entire barren landscape. A small white piece of paper stuck to the front of the empty refrigerator. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice a dry croak. He pointed a trembling finger. "Look." She walked toward it, a sleepwalker in her own nightmare. She reached out a shaking, red-nailed hand and pulled the note from the door. She held it, her eyes scanning the two short, simple, devastating sentences written in her mother's familiar, neat script. "You wanted the house? It's all yours." The first sentence was a chilling, mocking echo of her own entitlement. The house was hers. She had won. But the second sentence was the key to a terrifying new room. "The foreclosure notices are in the mail." Foreclosure? The word was a foreign object, but she understood its meaning. She had seen the signs on other, less fortunate lawns. It was a word of failure, of debt, of a world of adult consequences she had never had to inhabit. The house was not a gift. It was a trap. My daughter had not just left. She had bequeathed her a catastrophe. She had left her holding the bag, and the bag was on fire. The sheer, brilliant cruelty of it was a thing of terrible, beautiful logic. My daughter, my arrogant, and now finally, completely defeated daughter, simply slid down the side of the empty refrigerator and collapsed in a heap on the cold, hard kitchen floor. The note was the main event, but I had left behind a second, equally devastating act. As Eliza sat on the floor, her mind a screaming void, Mark's eyes were drawn to the one other object in the barren kitchen. On the bare granite countertop sat a neat, thick stack of mail. The mail I had been quietly intercepting and hiding for the past week. A collection of stark, menacing, windowed envelopes. He reached for the pile. The first and thickest envelope was from the city's property tax office. He tore it open. Inside was the annual and now seriously overdue property tax bill. It was a staggering 5-figure sum. At the bottom, in a stark red font, was the new total, including late fees and interest penalties. A low, guttural groan escaped his lips. "What is it?" Eliza whispered from the floor. "The taxes," he croaked. We owe thousands in taxes." But they were just getting started. Mark reached for the next envelope. Homeowners insurance. The annual premium, another 4-figure sum, was also past due. The letter contained a polite but firm warning. If the balance was not paid in 10 days, the policy would be canceled, leaving their new asset completely uninsured. And then the final, brutal letter. A thick, heavy envelope sent by registered mail from the legal department of the bank. He tore it open, his hands shaking so violently he almost ripped the contents. Inside was a stark, non-negotiable legal document, a formal and final notice of foreclosure. It detailed the history of missed payments on a home equity loan, the default, and the bank's imminent right to seize and sell the property. This was the masterstroke of my plan, conceived with Mr. Graves. 3 months ago, when Diane and I started the Code Red protocol, I had taken one final action. I walked into Mr. Graves's office. "I need to liquidate some assets," I told him, "and I need to take out a home equity loan." He had looked at me, confused. "Brenda, you have millions. You don't need a loan." "I know," I'd said, my voice cold and clear. "This loan isn't for me. It's for my daughter." I took out the loan, and I never made a single payment. The document in Mark's shaking hands laid out the full, catastrophic scope of their new problem. The date for the foreclosure auction was set for just 3 weeks away. The full, beautiful horror of their situation was finally laid bare. They hadn't inherited a house. They had inherited a massive, empty, rapidly depreciating liability. A house that was uninsured, owed thousands in back taxes, and was about to be sold out from under them. My daughter, who had so arrogantly demanded control of my paycheck, was now the sole unwilling proprietor of my debt. The scream Eliza let out this time was different. It was not the shriek of a baffled queen. It was the raw, primal cry of a cornered animal. Rage was useless against a default notice. You cannot bully a tax bill. Her only instinct was to find the person who had always fixed everything, her mother. She snatched her phone, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unlock it. She found my contact, her direct line to a world of easy solutions, and pressed call. The sound that met her was not my familiar voice. It was a cold, robotic, recorded message. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." The finality of it, the impersonal, technological brutality, was a new, incomprehensible cruelty. She had not just been left. She had been erased. She tried again, a frantic, useless gesture. Same result. Her next call was to her Aunt Diane. Diane, her sharp, practical, and now terrifyingly complicit aunt. The result was the same. Disconnected, blocked. The two pillars of her support system had, in a single, coordinated act of rebellion, vanished from her universe. She was completely, utterly alone. The panic, now a wild, screaming thing, propelled her to her last resort, her friends, the glamorous fair-weather audience for her lifelong performance. She began to call them, one by one, her voice a high, frantic wail of pure desperation. "Stacy! Oh my God, you are not going to believe what my psycho mother just did. She moved out and took everything, and now there's this foreclosure thing. Can I come stay with you?" The excuses, I am sure, were a symphony of polite regrets. "Oh my God, Tiff, that's insane. I'd love to, but my own crazy family is like, all here. There's literally no room." "Aw, sweetie, that's so wild. We were actually just heading out of town to my fiance's parents' place. So sorry." Her crisis was a story. A juicy, delicious piece of gossip. It was not a problem they were willing to own. Her show had just become a little too real, a little too messy, and a little too poor. She was a social, and now, apparently, a financial leper. The isolation was not just a feeling. It was a cold, hard fact. The final, most exquisite act of their humiliation was one they had arranged themselves. The party. The epic Christmas Eve party for Eliza's influencer friends. At around 9 p.m., just as the full, profound horror of their situation had begun to truly sink in, the doorbell rang. It was the first of their guests. A young, impossibly cool couple, dressed in ironic high-fashion festive attire. They stood on the porch, a bottle of expensive craft gin in hand, their faces alight with the expectation of a glamorous Instagrammable party. And then Eliza opened the door. The scene that greeted them was not one of a chic, curated holiday gathering. It was a scene of a profound domestic and financial apocalypse. The house was dark, the only light a cold, unflattering beam from Eliza's phone. The air was frigid. The rooms behind her were a vast, echoing, creepy void. And Eliza herself, the glamorous hostess, was a wreck. Her perfect makeup was a mess of tear-streaked ruin. Her beautiful party dress was rumpled. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated despair. Tiff? The young man stammered, his ironic detachment shattered. Is everything okay? And with that, the dam of Eliza's fragile composure burst. The story tumbled out, a messy, incoherent torrent of tears, blame, and self-pity, so profound it was a work of art. The friends, of course, were horrified and deeply, deeply embarrassed. They mumbled their hasty, awkward apologies and fled, as if the house itself were a source of contagious poverty. But they had, of course, texted everyone else on the guest list. And so, for the next hour, Eliza and Mark were forced to stand at the door of their cold, dark, empty house and greet a steady stream of their beautiful, trendy, horrified friends. They had to explain, over and over and over again, the story of their own spectacular social and financial demise. Each new arrival was a fresh wave of humiliation. Each car that pulled up, each confused, pitying look on the faces of their former acolytes, was another small death. By 10:01 p.m., the arrivals had stopped. The street was quiet again. The party was officially, and with a beautiful, cathartic finality, over before it had even begun. Eliza and Mark were left completely alone in the cold, dark, empty shell of their former life. Their brand had not been launched. It had been, in the most public and humiliating way imaginable, liquidated. While my daughter was descending into her own private, deserved circle of hell, I was in heaven. My heaven was a quiet, elegant, 2-bedroom condo in a luxury retirement community in the waterfront district overlooking the bay. The contrast between her Christmas Eve and mine was a thing of stark, beautiful poetry. Her house was cold. Mine was warm. The thermostat set to a perfect, unapologetic 72 degrees. Her house was dark. Mine was full of soft, festive light from a small, elegant tree in the corner. Her house was empty. Mine was full of beautiful new furniture, all of it chosen by me, for me. She was alone, a prisoner of her own self-inflicted isolation. I was with my sister, Diane, the one true loyal ally in my life. We sat at an elegant dining table set for two. We were not eating a resented pot roast. We were enjoying a quiet, delicious Christmas Eve dinner of crab cakes and a crisp, cold Sauvignon Blanc. To new beginnings, Diane said, raising her glass, her eyes shining with a fierce, loving pride. To new beginnings, I repeated, my voice thick with a new and unfamiliar emotion, a quiet, profound joy. There was no drama, no tension, no performance, just the simple, beautiful peace of two sisters sharing a meal in a safe, happy home. After dinner, we sat on my private balcony, wrapped in soft blankets, looking out at the dark, calming water. "Do you think she's okay?" I asked, a small involuntary flicker of my old maternal concern. Diane looked at me, her expression a mix of love and a firm dose of reality. "No, Bren," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "She is not okay. And that is the best and most necessary Christmas gift you have ever given her." And I knew, with a certainty as clear and as calm as the dark water before me, that she was absolutely right. The final act of my liberation took place a month later. The foreclosure on my old city row house was complete. The house, the scene of my long, exhausting servitude, now belonged to the bank. The house was sold at auction for a price that more than covered the outstanding balance of the home equity loan I had so brilliantly defaulted on. The remaining, and not insignificant, proceeds from the sale had been deposited, as per my instructions, into my new, untouchable private account. I had, in essence, been paid to evict my own parasitic daughter. The beautiful, elegant irony was not lost on me. I received a letter, of course, forwarded from my old address. It was a long, rambling, self-pitying screed from Eliza. It was a masterpiece of narcissistic, revisionist history, full of blame for me, for Mark, whom I'd heard she had already left, for the unfairness of a universe that had not bent to her will. It was the letter of a woman who had learned absolutely nothing. I read the first few sentences, and I felt a profound final wave of nothing. The power she had held over me, the power to hurt me, to exhaust me, was gone. She was a stranger, and her problems were no longer mine to solve. I did not finish the letter. I simply tore it into small, neat pieces and dropped it into the trash. The conversation was over. The file was closed. That same afternoon, I went to a community center in a part of the city that the tour buses always avoided. It was a place of quiet, inspiring hope, a place that ran a program for young single mothers, providing job training, child care, and help securing stable housing. I met with the director, a tired, fierce woman running a miracle on a shoestring budget. I had a check with me. It was not a small check. It was for the full amount of the proceeds from the sale of my old house. "I would like to make a donation," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I would like to fund your housing program for the next 10 years. The look on her face, a look of pure, unadulterated joy, was the greatest return on investment I had ever received. My late husband, Robert, and I, we had been builders. We had spent our lives building a foundation for our family. That foundation had crumbled, not from a flaw in the design, but from a rot in the material it was meant to support. But a good builder doesn't just walk away from a failed project. They salvage the materials. They build something new, something stronger, something better. I looked out the window of the community center at the bustling life of the city that had been my home for so long, and I smiled. I had finally found a new foundation, a new home, not just for me, but for 100 other women who were just trying to build a future for their own children. It was the best and most satisfying investment I had ever made. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you are here.